Good afternoon, and welcome back to day 2 of our virtual conference on Latinos with Disabilities, exploring the intersections of culture, disability, and identity. For those who joined us yesterday, we're excited to continue our important conversations. If you're joining us for today, welcome. My name is Travis Davis, and I'll be your host. For those of you who I did not meet yesterday, I'm a disability advocate, speaker, and podcaster, and I have the pleasure of hosting this virtual conference on behalf of my friends at United Cerebral Palsy. Now, before we dive in, just a few announcements. This event will run from 1 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time today and tomorrow. Well, just today. Please note that all times are Eastern Time. The conference will be held in English. We are pleased to offer closed captioning in English or Spanish. To access, select Show Captions from the Zoom menu and select your preferred language. We also have live Spanish interpretation available. To listen to our presentation in Spanish, select Interpretation from the Zoom menu, then select Spanish. If you have any questions today or throughout the event, please feel free to use the Q&A function, or you can email us. Our contact information is in the chat. If you did join us yesterday and did not have an opportunity to complete the conference evaluation, you can find the link in the chat. The same link can be used to evaluate today's sessions. Now, before we begin, I want to thank United Cerebral Palsy for hosting this incredible event and give a special shout out to our sponsors, Incor, Source America, and Waymo, whose generosity has made this conference completely free for all participants. Now, I'm excited to kick off today's session with a panel presentation titled Closing the Divide, Disability Inclusion and Latino Communities. This panel brings together voices from different lived experiences, perspectives within the Latino community. Together, they will reflect on the cultural values, challenges, and strengths that shape the lives of Latinos with disabilities. Through personal stories and professional insight, the panel will highlight how families, communities, and individuals can work together to create greater understanding, inclusion, and advocacy. Moderating today's panel is Alexis Sanchez, Development Coordinator at United Cerebral Palsy. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists. First, Laura Gonzalez, Director of Intake and Transition at UCP Seguin of Greater Chicago. Maria T. Gutierrez, Family Navigator at Auburn University Regional Autism Network. And Joshua Torres, Principal at UCP of Central Florida.
Great, thank you, Travis. And thank you everyone that's joining us for the third day of Hispanic Heritage Month and the second day of our conference. So I say let's just jump straight into the questions here. So to start us off, can each of you share a little bit about your background, your personal and professional journey, and what professional journey has brought you to the intersection of disability and Latino identity? So who would like to start us off?
Hello, everybody. I can start. Laura Gonzalez from UCP Seguin. So I've been in the field of working with people with adults with intellectual development disabilities for the last 32 years, and in the Chicagoland area over here in Illinois. And I've also, throughout my whole 32 years of experience in employment, day program, and transition services, I've always worked very closely with the Latino community and have been able to assist them and support them, and hopefully be able to get them to the next level so that they get support services that they need.
I could go next if it is okay with Josh. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria Gutierrez. My pronouns are she and her, and I am honored to be here today with all of you. I am a proud middle-aged Latina woman of Mexican descent. I am the parent of an incredible neurodivergent young adult. I am also the caretaker of my elderly mother and someone who has walked the road many families are still navigating today. For several years, I have worked as a family navigator in Alabama, and as a parent mentor in California under the Family Focused Resource and Empowerment Center. I was supporting other parents and caregivers. They navigate the complex systems of care, whether it is from education, healthcare, to developmental services, and beyond, because we know that our families need more. My work has always been rooted in the one core belief where I think that families are their loved ones' strongest advocates. So I bring today personal and professional experience to you guys and to this conversation. I am deeply honored and committed on helping families being seen and supported and empowered, including our migrants families. So thank you for having me here, and I look forward for learning and sharing together today.
Good afternoon. My name is Josh Torres. I also want to share I'm honored, as my panelists have shared. I am an educator and mental health counselor, almost 28 years going. I also want to share, I also have muscular dystrophy, so I have my own personal experience with dealing with disability and what that looks like. And originally from New York, I currently work as a school principal working with students with disabilities and navigating those challenges that we experience within our own Hispanic community, as my population is about 90% Hispanic as of today. And I think today is an important part of us to share what our communities need, what we can do to help our communities, because our communities need a voice and they need someone to support and advocate for them. And I think that's what we are doing today. I'm excited to be here.
Great, thank you so much. So for our first question, here we go. What does disability inclusion mean to you personally, especially within the context of Latino culture? And Josh, if you would like to answer that. Oh. Okay, here. I'm not sure if Josh is able to hear us right now, but
I
we
can. I
can.
apologize.
Okay,
My
no worries.
internet went kind of. Can you repeat? Can you repeat again?
Yeah,
Sorry.
no worries. It happens. What does disability inclusion mean to you personally, especially within the context of Latino culture?
So for me, disability inclusion means moving beyond just access alone, but ensuring that individuals with disabilities are fully valued, respected, and that we are empowered to contribute to their talents. It's about creating environments where our disabilities are recognized as part of human diversity and not as a limitation. And I think within our Latin community, this takes on a particular significance where everything is rooted in our cultural traditions. But conversations about disabilities is seen as sometimes as a stigma. And I think for me, inclusion means challenging those narratives and reframing disability as a source of a strength and making it part of our identity. And it also means ensuring that Latinos with disabilities see themselves as leaders, as advocates. For me, it was very difficult in my journey because I felt like I didn't have anyone. And luckily I had mentors, Hispanic mentors who guided me and helped me to see that a disability is not, you are part of a community and it helps to be accepted. For me, that was very important. And I think the conversations have to happen like these to help our Hispanic community see that they can be empowered and we're here to help them.
Yeah, that's definitely a great answer. Does anyone want to expand on that, or should we go towards the next question? Okay. So for or Maria? Okay. For the next question is, in your experience, how do Latino families typically approach disability within the household, and what kinds of support do they need more of?
Laura, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, I can go ahead and go first. So in my experience, my personal experience, and obviously not only I am Latino, and I forgot to mention that I also have several family members with disabilities. So I've kind of seen it within my own family, also in my work, but we tend to, just in our culture, we tend to want to take care of our own. So that kind of limits the families to want to seek or look for support. they tend to think that by asking for support, they're kind of not doing what they're supposed to. And it's, we have to do what we need to for our people. I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed that helps the Latino families and kind of having them become open to accepting support is making them feel comfortable speaking their language, meeting them where they're at, supporting them in the fact that a lot starts with building trust. I think the building trust is huge because once you're able to build trust with the family, then they're able to kind of accept and let you know what their support needs are. One of the things that that I keep mentioning is if we can come up with a model of a one-stop shop for families, because it's very hard for them to have to go to multiple providers or different staff for different needs, because once they develop a rapport with and trust with one person, they want to continue to work with that person and all of their needs. So that is definitely something that I've noticed, that even though I might be supporting their their adult with developmental disabilities, I'm open to supporting them when they call just to, can you please read this letter for me and translate? Or my husband is having an issue. Can you try to kind of figure out or provide a resource? So kind of doing a one-stop shop for the families, because it's very hard for them to have multiple providers and build that trust with so many people.
If I could add to what Laura has explained so well, for our families, the idea, we know that our Latino families, they have a very strong commitment to each other, right? There is loyalty, devotion, and dedication to the family when you have a loved one with autism. But I could also feel that, the caregivers, they face the stigma, they feel isolated, and sometimes it's so hard to navigate every system of care. So having a one-stop shop, it will be ideal in my ideal world. But what can we do? I'm a strong believer that sometimes we need to start with education and empowerment with the family, right? So it's important to share easy information when we start from IEPs, okay, ADA protections, and just think about all the new lingo the families need to understand now in order to be a better advocate for the child. So, and also understand that sometimes we need to shift the perspective on disability from a charity-based view to a rights-based one, okay, where the individuals are seen and being seen as an equal, and that they have value, and that they could have a voice, and that they could access any opportunity within that community.
Yeah, very well said. So Laura and Josh, what are some of the biggest barriers to inclusion, whether social, institutional, or systematic, that Latinos with disabilities face today?
Laura, do you want me to go first? Okay, so I'll go first. Latinos with disabilities, they face multiple. So as a school principal, I see it all the time where, as Maria was just sharing earlier, some of the systemic ones are not knowing what resources are available and providing that outage. So Latinos with disabilities, sometimes, for example, in my school, they don't know what autism is about, what neurodivergent means. It's empowering, like Maria said, our families to understand those barriers and that their child deserves a right to participate. And there are some structural inequities compounded there, but that comes from breaking it down. So for example, at my school, what we do is we host monthly events for parents where they have the ability to understand what each disability looks like, what's available, what resources they have. Because sometimes it is overwhelming when you finally get a diagnosis and you're like, what am I going to do with this? So for us, it's breaking that down and say, no, you have someone here. We're here for you. We have a counselor, it's a principal. We're here to support you and what that looks like. And we break it down step by step. We try not to make it use the big jargon, because sometimes families are presented with all these big words, IEPs, and the lingo, and they're like, I don't even know what this means. I don't even speak English. I need someone just to break it down in simple language. And I think that is the most important thing as us as educators, and making it more inclusive, breaking it down and what does it mean, and providing advocacy. And sometimes it's just an ear, just someone to listen to what they're going through.
Thank you, Yasha. And I totally agree. I think one of the things I wanted to touch on that it's sometimes that I've had experience with is sometimes it's even going back even further with denial of the disability. So it's really important to kind of meet the parents where they're at. Sometimes they're not only they don't understand the disability, they haven't accepted the disability. So I often come across families or parents that say, oh, he's going to outgrow it. I was the shy kid when I was young. It's something that that he's just going to grow. So it's really important to help the parents get to the point where they accept the disability before we can even get to the point of offering support and services. The language barrier, I agree, is a huge thing because they feel intimidated going into whether it's the school system, an agency where they don't see familiar faces, don't see people that speak their language. So just having someone that speaks their language is a great thing. And I think in general, too, one another huge thing that has always been there, and now with our political climate, it's even more of an issue, is the legal status of the family. Sometimes the individual with a disability might be a U.S. citizen or is a U.S. citizen and is entitled to other services, but because of the parent or the family's legal status, they're afraid to step up and demand or seek support. And we have to kind of help them understand that it is something that they need to do. And by building trust, they're able to kind of let you know their own personal situation, and then you support them in a way that you can still help them get the services that they need without disclosing their situation so that they don't feel like they're going to be in jeopardy of anything that's going on right now. But that has always been the issue in the past, and I feel lately it's even more of a concern with our families because they're very afraid to come out and seek support depending on their personal situation.
Okay. Maria, would you like to add to that, or wait for it? There we go. Okay, thank you. So what are some effective strategies professionals can use within their organizations or in their work with families to reduce cultural stigmas and these barriers that both of you have mentioned that they're facing?
Well, that's a great question, Alexis. So, and we have a long way to do. Okay, so we have a long way to do, all people that are involved in this field. But because reducing the cultural stigma, especially around disabilities, mental health, neurodivergence, this is going to require culturally sensitive, community-informed approaches. Okay, we all need to work on this. Like Laura was saying, okay, we need to start by building trust through cultural humility. We need to acknowledge that, not just assume, okay, that we might not know everything, and we need to be open to learn. Okay, how can we begin? Well, let's ask the family, about their cultural background. Be sensitive about their needs. Okay, but listen, not just hear. Okay, and really try to put our biases on the side, because sometimes many times, I would say the stereotypes play a huge role about how we're going to be trying to help the family. So we also need to frame support services in a way that probably align with the family values. So sometimes you might come with a solution, but that's not exactly what the family is looking for. For example, many times we address things as mental health services, but when you say that in the Latino community, it's perceived as something negative. So we might say, well, we have these tools that is going to support your child's well-being and success, right? So a lot of times we also focus on the deficits, but not on the strengths and the resilience that the child and the family has. So we need to acknowledge all that. We need to try to work with trusted people within the community. Families already have identified who are those people, right? It could be people from churches, promotoras de salud, the elderly within the community, and people that could speak honestly and help us break down the stigma from within the culture. You will be surprised how sometimes when you're trying to get a point across with a family, but then you bring somebody that looks like them, that speak their language, that understands, how that really opens the door for the conversation. And also to hold workshops and events in places where the family feel comfortable. Okay, not everybody would like to come to a clinic-based institution, right? So let's go into what we have in the community centers, local churches. So let's be creative about how can we address the needs, and let's think about the family unit, not just isolate and see the individual with a disability and see the deficits.
Maria, I think you did a great job. You kind of you encompassed everything I wanted to say, but to add to that, you did a great job. I wanted to say that going back to what Maria just stated, for us, it's empowering them with people in the community. You are so correct. Because I find when I bring people from my community to my school to speak to the parents, they are extremely excited because they get to see someone who's familiar, who is like them, going through the struggles that they're going through, and is basically sharing and being empathetic to them and just being able to be heard. I think for families is extremely important. And I think it helps to change the narrative. I'm not alone. I have someone who understands me, someone who looks like me, and someone who can actually support me. And what we do in our community in Central Florida is we support our parents by having a strong parent-teacher organization. And we invite people from the community to speak, because that helps to empower this and to break down the barriers, because I think that these systemic barriers, like Laura touched upon, are shaped from our grandparents where, we don't speak about these things. No, we need to learn to start speaking about these things and making them very comfortable, because once we start to do that, it's going to reduce the cultural stigma that we have. Because even within my own family, my parents didn't believe in the stigma. They showed me, just because you have a disability doesn't mean you're limited. However, I did have grandparents who had a perception, well, he has a disability. There's not much he's going to be able to do in life. And my parents were complete opposite, where they showed me it's important. You're going to do your best. You're going to go to school. Just because you have a disability doesn't mean you're limited, and life is not limit. Instead, your attitude is going to equal your altitude.
Thank you, Joshua. I totally agree. And just to add a little bit on that, one of the things that I've wanted to really hit on, because it happened with a community that I was working with, is sometimes we could do outreach events at the schools and public forums, but families are afraid to come out or to kind of reach out. So it's like, unless if I know where to find you, it's hard to kind of provide support. But I found that word of mouth or parent connection is a huge advantage. Because with this particular community, it took me a while, but once I was able to tap into one or two parents and was able to provide them support and they saw the benefit, they went back and told the other parents. And before I knew it, I had a whole bunch of referrals from that same community. And as I spoke to the parents and said, well, I've been trying to find you guys for the longest time. What finally did it? And they said, oh, we do Special Olympics, or we get together parent to parent, and they told us about you and how you help them. So that is a great strength or advantage to try to use, like find out the connection of a parent group or a parent to parent, because word of mouth is a lot. The other thing that I always say is meet the family or the parent where they're at. In today's world where we have technology and we have so many options and flexibility to communicate and support people, it's great, but it's not for everybody. So I always speak to families and I say, if you still prefer to meet in person, we will make an in-person appointment. If you feel more comfortable at first to speak via phone, let's speak on the phone until you feel comfortable to pursue to the next level. And for those that are a little more tech savvy, there is the virtual connection option, which is, it's a nice flexibility for when people have to deal with I'm not driving or babysitting issues, but I think just meeting the family where they're at and being flexible to kind of provide the support in whatever platform that they prefer, that also opens up a lot of doors, and they appreciate that accommodation that you do for them.
Okay, thank you for your answers. Definitely a lot to think about and apply, hopefully, for the people that are listening. So the next question is, have you encountered any cultural stigmas around disability in Latino communities? And if so, how have you or others worked to challenge them?
I could go first. I mean, I think just in general, like I said, I grew up in a family that's Latino with people with disabilities. I think one of the biggest thing is education, because sometimes not knowing is what kind of becomes something where people will be like, oh my God, look at that child, he's screaming or he's kicking. Not understanding that disability is a lot what needs to happen, where we need to educate the people in the community, in our families, in our Latinos, to say it's okay. And it's not that everybody is all at the same level, but there's learning disabilities, there's intellectual disabilities, there's mental health issues, because sometimes they don't even understand the difference. And so they just group everything together and don't understand it. So helping them understand the different type of disabilities and different support available, that does a huge thing. And in my 32 years, I've noticed a huge difference as time has gone on, that the Latino community, or just everybody in general, is a lot more understanding or has more knowledge of disabilities. And in that, it has caused them to be a little bit more understanding, or not feel like, oh my God, there's an individual there that's in a wheelchair, or there's an individual that's screaming and yelling. I do think we're moving forward in that, in the fact that education and exposure has been a positive thing in moving more in the direction of minimizing the stigmas.
And I agree completely with Laura. For me, my personal way of breaking the stigma, I have muscular dystrophy. So I have joined the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and twice a year we campaign and we go out to communities in Central Florida. And what we do is create advocacy booths. And basically we talk about disability, what that looks like for Hispanics and anyone in our Central Florida community, especially where I'm at in my region, because our region is full of 90% are Hispanic. And how do we do that outreach? And it's just us sometimes in a booth. It's sometimes us going into even department stores. It's us finding ways to bring us into the community. And it's like Laura said, it's just outreach and educating our community. Once you can educate your community, the knowledge, because there has been a change in the past 30 years, I will say, regarding disability and how it's viewed. And I completely agree with Laura that the more you empower and word of mouth, it quickly starts to grow within the community, and people will come to you and to help others. Because I've noticed in my community now, like my parents are helping other parents, and it's kind of having a domino effect.
You have to have under consideration exactly what kind of community you're working with. Okay, so I am in a rural area in Alabama, and we have a large population of people that are migrant families coming from all over, but we have families coming from Guatemala, where Spanish is not even their primary language. So knowing which kind of population you're working with and value their own beliefs is critical, right? What I have seen within our community is that sometimes families view disability as a punishment, right? But other families view it as a gift of God, right? And they don't see that the child is a punishment. And so trying to understand and respecting their beliefs and collaborating with them and letting them know that it's okay to take your child to Walmart, okay? It's okay to go to the park. I think that we are past beyond the days where we keep our people with disability hidden away from the view of society. I encourage our families, take them outside, join them on certain recreational activities, be out there. Let's be out there so that the rest of the community feel comfortable with us, okay? Sometimes I feel that people with disabilities, and if they are Latino, they have a double trouble. One because of the disability and the other one because of the color. So we need to encourage our families to be out there and within the community and join as many activities as possible, right? When they feel comfortable, right? And sometimes, like Laura was touching, sometimes you need to meet them where they are, right? And sometimes for some families, it's like taking baby steps. And for others, they're ready to join the world and they're like, okay, tell me what to do. And that's great. When you see that progress, that is just beautiful.
Just to add one more thing before we move on. So I think touching on the language is a big thing, because sometimes we speak the language, but we have to speak the language that they understand. So we might speak the professional language, but sometimes the parents, we have the slang, the Spanish slang, and sometimes being able to kind of be able to communicate to them that way, that in itself makes them feel a lot more comfortable and trust. But also too, I think when you're a Latino and you're helping a Latino family, you kind of understand where they're coming from and the barriers. But when you're not, one of the biggest issues is like the Latino community requires a lot of hand-holding. And sometimes that could come across as frustrating for those that don't understand it. They might think like, oh, they don't care. They're not replying because they don't care. They might not be replying because they haven't built that trust. Or they're having difficulty because they have a lot of things on their plate. So just kind of being able to kind of work with them where they're at in that sense too, because they are parents that you give them a phone number and they run with it and they do it. There's others that you're going to have to follow up a couple of times and possibly even sit down with them and place that phone call with them. And then there's those that need the full hand-on support. So it's like just kind of, once again, going back to being more of being flexible to see where that family is, where they're coming from, what their needs are, and not trying to do a cookie cutting system of this is how I help everybody, because it's not going to work. Our community of Latinos does require a lot of support for different reasons, and we have to be open to it. And like it was said before, having cultural competency is one thing, but having humility is a whole thing, because you think you know everything and we don't. Every day we all learn something, and we need to be open and be think outside the box every day that we're trying to help an individual.
Yeah, those are great responses. Definitely hearing the importance of language and communication being a repeating factor in how we are able to educate people. So definitely something to take note of. So for our next question is, what strengths or cultural practices within Latino communities can be leveraged to build more inclusive spaces for people with disabilities?
Do you guys want me to go first?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so let's think about family-centered support models, okay? But I also want to explain that sometimes as a Latino families, we tend to do everything for our loved ones, right? So when I work with families, I know that they are picking up the clothes for the child, they prepare the breakfast, right? And they do not give the voice to that individual. So we need to create family-centered support models, but we need to invite the whole family, but the person with a disability. That person needs to be the center, okay? And within every decision making, we need to be able to create a family unit. Now let's think about our families that are here that they don't have a natural support system. That makes it more complicated for them, right? So we need to connect them with the resources that are available within the community. It is important, like Laura and Josh were mentioning, to provide that one-to-one relationship with the families and within the community members, right? We need to educate the staff that is working within our agencies so they are able to understand and be respectful, so they could build that trust that Laura was mentioning. Otherwise, families will come one time and you will lose it, right? And it needs to feel natural. I know that it's hard to find bilingual personal, especially here where we are in Alabama, right? But if it is possible, you need to include bicultural staff, but somebody that looks like me and like them, okay? And create those opportunities within the community to design those services that are accessible for everyone. Like I mentioned before, sometimes we oversee that there are already certain institutions and groups like community faith-based organizations and leaders that that they will offer, to collaborate in educating the families, creating those opportunities for the families to learn English as a second language, and, just to help reduce the stigma and making sure that the families feel safe on those places where they come to seek for those services.
I totally agree. I want to jump on that before I forget on the fact that besides the fact that we like to do everything and take care of our own, we do have to work with the families to ensure that we increase independence for the individual with the disability, because I've seen it many times where parents just want to baby them and kind of do everything for them because of their disability or whatever. And I've had to work with them, but it's baby steps. You have to kind of slowly say, okay, let's start small. I had a family that wanted their family member to go to a day program, but they were afraid to put them on their bus because it was not the safe bus from the school system. Now they had to take more of a pub, more public where other individuals were at. So helping them kind of see different options, saying, okay, let's start and apply for that service. And then if you feel like you need to know where your family member is, I've helped families with getting like GPS systems for the individual so that they feel comfortable of when their family members in the community. But just creating baby steps and letting them know that just because they have a disability doesn't mean they're not able to contribute to the household chores and do things for their own. Because I always have the hard conversation with the families that they're not going to be around forever. And as much as the parents think that the siblings are going to be able to step in and take care of their brother or sister, that does not always happen. So why not develop the self-help skills and independence for the person with a disability right now so that they can become more independent and self-sufficient. And when the parents are no longer available to provide that support, it's an easier transition.
Can I touch upon what I like both your answers? I think it's absolutely important. But I think there's a component of mental health that we don't talk about, that our families don't want to take their kids sometimes when they need that mental health support. And there's a big stigma there. And it's okay for our Hispanics with disabilities to get mental health support. But I think for us, advocating that it's okay to get support and hearing it from us, because that has been a big challenge, at least in my community, where when you recommend them to go to counseling, it's perceived, oh, there's something wrong with my child. No, it's basically empowering your child. We want to make sure, whether it's the adult or the child, we're finding them and giving them empowerment, because along the way, as they get older, they're going to need those resources. And I think it's important that advocacy also talks about mental health, because it's a big component with our families.
I want to touch on one more thing that came up, and hopefully you guys would agree, because it's always been one of the things that another challenge that our Latino community and medication regimen. And I know it's hard to understand when you're not coming from this community, but that is something, a struggle, because sometimes when their family member with a disability is prescribed medication or is to follow a medication regimen, they might not always follow it for their own beliefs. Well, we like to do it natural ways. We like to do home remedy ways. And so I often have to explain to families that it is very important that they follow the medication regimen with their loved one, especially when there's mental health issues and their psychiatric medications, because sometimes their understanding is, well, I'm not going to give the medication until they need it. So I always have to do a basic presentation or explanation of psychiatric medication is not like your Advil headache. You wait till your head hurts, then you give it to them, and then it cures the issue. Helping them understand that for certain medications, it's really important that they follow the medication regimen so that the individual stabilized, that the medication is in their blood system, and then they see the positive effect. But that's always been something that I find that I have to help the families understand, because they don't want to do the medication regimen, and then they're struggling more with mental health issues with their loved one. And it's not until they understand that once they follow it and put the individual long enough where they're stabilized, then they kind of see the benefit, and then they follow medication regimen like it is. But that is, if you're not coming from our culture, that could become frustrating for the medical professionals or people in the school that just don't understand why the family's not following the protocol like they're being told. It's not that they're trying to hurt their family or their loved one, it's just lack of understanding and education on how that medication might work. So that just doing that in itself could get you to help the family in a different level.
And I would like to add something now that Josh and Laura expanded a little bit. I was hoping that Josh was going to bring the mental health and and Laura the medication, but I also want to talk about that our families, our Latino families, we don't talk about sex and disability. Okay, we think that our kids are going to be babies forever and little, and we sometimes we treat them like that, and we think that they are not sexual creatures. They are sexual human beings, right? And so that's another layer that we need to address as a society, right? How do we go about sexual education when we're talking about with individuals with disabilities, especially for those that have more profound needs, profound autism or an intellectual disability. So how do we address those needs within the Latino community? It has to come through education. We need to educate families, but also be mindful about their cultural beliefs and their personal preferences, but started from the bottom. We need to start building those foundations so that families could flourish and feel comfortable talking about sex education, right? And when I work with families, just like Laura, I talk to the families and I said, let's begin with giving the proper names, the scientific names to the body parts. Right? We need to say, like, this is what it's called. This is not a cookie. This is not a bird. Okay. So that we started educating our loved ones and empowering them, with the tools so that they could be safe as they grow older.
Thank you. Thank you. There's, definitely a lot of important information to take note of. And someone just asked us a question, and we'll definitely get to that at the end. So if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat for us to get to at the end. So let's get to our last prepared question, and which leads us into looking into the future. So what gives you hope for the future of disability inclusion in Latino communities, and what steps can we take to help make that vision a reality? No.
Well, for me, what gives me the hope for the disability inclusion within the Latino community is that our families are strong and that there are close family ties out there. So they are part of who we are, right? Latino families have always been there for their loved ones. And now when we see more people out there within the community, that gives me the hope so that there could be some changes. But we also need to be thinking about new ways to create those supports and opportunities and resources. So what kind of steps can we take? Let me touch about at the policy level. Well, it's very important that we push for more services, more funding. I know that we always could get more funding, right? I mean, we always need more funding, but we need to understand that as a community, we need to respect the Latino culture, and we need to be able to create more bilingual programs and education, and whether it is in the healthcare, and try to make those policies that are going to be including everyone. So when the policies reflect the unique needs of the Latino community, it helps us make and create more opportunities that are more accessible. So we need to embrace our culture, the family values, respect our families, right? And make sure that the families don't feel that they are alone. I think that when we are celebrating and appreciate and work with the families together on making sure that the individual reach their fullest potential, then we're doing something good as a whole community.
I think for me, what gives me hope is what I'm seeing in my community is sharing those stories of empowerment, especially in Central Florida, where there is much more Hispanics in our community. And for me, what gives me pride is to bring those into my school, to help my students see that those barriers are being challenged and that there is hope that they can see that there are other people in our community who are like them and that they can be part of that same community when they get older. And it's sharing those experiences and being that advocate for them. So being an advocate and empowering is what gives me hope.
For me, I think what does it is just the fact that I see, like Maria and Joshua said, we're here to stay. The Spanish language is one of our primary languages here. So I feel comfortable that the families have the support that they need when they go out in the community, because there's more people that look like them. There's other families that support each other. But just the fact that we're helping educate and help them understand that they are entitled to services, so that that would increase advocacy, which in turn will require that they demand what they're entitled to. So it's taking us a while, but I am hopeful, and I see when families move from one level to the other, where before they were afraid to go to the outreach event, now they're going, now they're asking questions, now they're asking for services, or if they were afraid to go to the IEP meeting, but now with our support, with being there to kind of help them understand the information and help them ask the right questions, it's slowly but surely building up knowledge and educating themselves so that they know that they feel confident and competent to go ahead and demand the services that they're entitled to. So obviously, yes, we need more services, more funding, but we will not get more services and funding unless if they know that we're here and that's needed. So by the families coming out and demanding what they need, then hopefully that would in return come back with more funding and more services for the people, because the demand is higher. The more we come out, the more that we will be out there. So I always say, make your voice heard, make sure you say it, but say it nicely, but you must say it. That's what I always tell my family. You got to say it, just say it nicely.
Yes, great. Thank you so much. And so let's get into some of these questions from the audience. So our first one that we want to cover is that has kind of been touched upon, but how do language, immigration status, or access to resources affect the ability of Latino families or service professionals to advocate for disability rights or services?
I can start a little bit on that. So from my experience and with the families that I work with and the supports that we provide, one of the main things that I have to let families know, if they don't know already, is that special education is a mandate and legal status is not an issue. But I work with them also once they leave the school system. So it's always good. Part of the transition services that we offer is helping them understand that there's going to be a shift in systems where they're right now, their family member might be entitled to the special education, but once they leave that, it's all going to be about eligibility and applying for services. So unfortunately, for the students that are not legally here, that has been a huge barrier, because now they don't have access to the services that they had before. So trying to help the family understand that, trying to navigate if there's a way that we can help the individual become legally here so that they could access the services. That's one thing. The other thing is, as I had mentioned before, sometimes parents' legal status is different than the student, but that should not stop the student from accessing and asking for the services that they need. So it's just kind of understanding the status for the whole family, helping them understand why in one system they were able to acquire certain things, but now in a different system, it might be different. So in our state of Illinois, Medicaid is free for all individuals up until 19, regardless of the legal status. So that is something that I help families understand. And then how to kind of help them get resources after 19 if the individual's no longer able to get Medicaid or the medical insurance.
I wish that was like that for us here, Laura, in Florida. I wish we had that resource. That's amazing. And unfortunately, in Florida, what we do is, in Central Florida anyway, what we do is we have partner hubs where we bring our families to, and we do provide education and literacy regarding whether immigration status or not. We will find a way to provide them service. But sometimes they are barriers beyond my control. I wish I had our parents the access. It's not as easy in Florida as it may be in Chicago, but we do navigate ways to find support for our families, even if it is through virtual, but we will find them resources. But it is a challenge. And I can say for us in Florida, we're navigating that as we speak. It's a hard one. And I wish I had a perfect answer, but I don't have one. But as a community, educationally, we are supporting our families, even if it means sending them out of state for other types of resources. But we do support them in finding those resources.
If it is hard for you, Josh, in Florida, it is a little bit even more challenging in Alabama, I have to say. So I do too wish that we could have more resources like Chicago, like in California, like in other states, right? But it is what it is. But that doesn't mean that we are not going to be looking for resources for the families, right? I think that everybody that is working on this field, you're going to go and see if there's other agencies, nonprofit organizations, churches. Somebody out there is going to be right there and is going to be ready to help and assist families with individuals with disabilities. So again, as a community, I mean, what I have seen is that sometimes there might be some short-term solutions because whether, a nonprofit got a grant and so they're able to provide some kind of like short-term fixes, but we need to continue advocating for meaningful policy changes, right? This cannot continue without being some changes happening within the United States. We need to be addressing the huge gaps, disparities that we have within the funding, right? I mean, sometimes some states, they have very little, right? And nobody's looking, or some people are looking into how do we fix this? And we need to try to see how can we make those changes and as a society. And we need to leave the Latino and the immigrants families with some kind of hope, right? We cannot just leave them without support. So we need to make sure that there is some clear protection when the families are trying to access services, right? Regardless of their immigration status. So by pushing changes, we could build a more equitable system for the families, no matter their background, okay? There needs to be resources and support to care for these people and to care for their loved ones, right? And to help them thrive in society and to reach their highest potential, whatever that might look like.
Thank you. Yeah. Definitely, like I said before, really communication and language barriers has been an ongoing topic. And so it kind of leads into the next question, which is how can we make sure that disability services are truly accessible for Spanish-speaking families beyond just this language barrier, beyond just translating materials? That definitely is a more difficult topic. Like Maria, you said that comes down to policy changes, but is there anything any of you would like to add to that?
Well, definitely providers need to be mindful and be sensitive that if it is possible to provide language access on the native language of the person, of the family, right? To have materials available, but written in a parent-friendly language. So many times you get, I mean, you guys know, Josh and Laura, right? When families go to IEP meetings, they get these documents that are all about the rights, right, of the family. And these are like legal terminology. But that's very difficult to understand. And sometimes when you translate that into your native language, it's even more so. Because we need to have under consideration the level of education that we're working with our families, right? We just don't know if people had access to post-secondary education. So some of these lingo words and acronyms that we use might mean nothing for the family. So let's give them parent-friendly language documents, right? Let's have more educational opportunities where you bring a speaker that is, versed on their native language of the majority of the people attending the educational program. And let's try to seek for other resources. There are some resources at the national level, right? Let's tap into those other resources and let's collaborate with other entities, whether they are within the state or outside the state. And be mindful that Google Translation is not most appropriate, right? We need to find, I have been in meetings where they might be an interpreter, and depending where the interpreter is from, some of the translation might not have the same meaning for the family, right? Like, for example, I could think of a family that one day that I was assisting, not as an interpreter, but as a family support system. And the interpreter was from Colombia, but the parent was from Mexico. And when they something about pajilla, I look at the parent's face and she was like, what? What does that mean, paja? When it was talking about straw, popote. So totally, just one word took the whole sentence out of context. So we need to be mindful about having qualified interpreters for the families. Now, how do we approach to this? More funding, but let's be creative, right? Let's try to collaborate with agencies. Let's utilize the services and the entities that we have already in place, universities, right? Then we might have students that might want to volunteer. And so, so let's be creative and trying to look for resources that could close those gaps when we're talking about language access for our families.
I think, Maria, you touched on it perfectly. And for us, and we're very fortunate that in this community, everything is in any language possible. But I think coming back to the original question is advocacy. Everyone has a voice, and one voice does count to make a difference. And it's up to each of us, one at a time, lobbying with your state, lobbying within your community, making yourself heard in community meetings, and empowering that voice and letting everyone know with a disability, your voice matters. And that's what gives them hope. So that's what we do in our community, and we strive to do.
My 2 cents outside of the language barrier, and Maria touched on it very well, which is very frustrating when you hear about the families are being supported and they're offered somebody to kind of translate, but then the language is different and it doesn't make it any better. Or Google is good, but it's a start, but not necessarily the final answer. I think going back to what I have mentioned before, in my ideal world, I would like to have families to be able to access like a one-stop shop. And I know there's always someone can know everything, but my true belief is if you at least make yourself knowledgeable about other resources and help them connect. So when a family comes to me and I don't know or I don't have that specialty, I at least am open to navigating the system and looking for a resource and making that connection and passing them on to the next person versus just saying, nope, I'm just here for your son, for people with disabilities. When it comes to employment, everything else goes to someone else, because families want to kind of get the same support or help from one-stop shop. Also, too, going back to being flexible in today's world and technology and people working different shifts, we have to stop trying to offer the traditional service in the traditional office hours. Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5. We have parents that work second shift, third shift. So we have to be open to kind of support them where they're at. So I often will work flexible hours. There might be a day where I do 8 to 4, but on a different day I do 12 to 8. And I try to kind of give appointments in the evenings for those families to support them, because sometimes that in itself is a barrier. If the family cannot get to see you at the time that they're available, that in itself is going to close doors and they're not going to be able to access services. So just kind of not really thinking outside the box and not doing the traditional service delivery model and meeting the people where they're at, because that's the only way that they're going to be able to get the support that they need.
Yeah, let's get another question from the Q&A. So this one is kind of it very much is about, how people talk about being Latino. It's not a monolith. There's, so many different languages, cultures. So someone asked if you can give an example or about cultural differences between various Latino communities or countries or origin. And I know, Maria, you mentioned that with the whole Bahia, Sorbete, Bombilla, like different Spanish-speaking countries might say different words for the same item, which in this case was straw. So yeah. Uh, sorry. So if any of you have perhaps another example of that kind of cultural difference that maybe has affected a job or trying to help someone who has a disability or any situation like that.
I am sure that Josh and Laura, they have also experience working with different individuals from different nationalities, right? But I could remember a family that, they are from Mexico, but both parents are from the northern part of Mexico. So, and people from the northern part, they tend to be very strong, use very strong voice. And for some reason, every time that the father specifically was coming to the meetings, he was perceived as being aggressive. And so it was not until I went to the meeting and I overheard one of the teachers saying like, he's always so mad. And I'm like, well, no, that's the way we speak. That's the way they speak people on the northern part of the country, right? So even making that, giving that kind of information, it was it from that moment on, the meetings were totally took a different role, right? Because people knew that that's just the way we speak, right? I mean, I'm from Guadalajara, Jalisco, but I'm also speak very, very strong. When my husband met me, he said, like, are you always mad? I'm like, no, I'm just loud. So so it's trying to understand, where we're coming from and, what does it mean? But at the end of the day, we're all parents and we just want to be that voice for our child, right? And to get the resources that they need in order to be successful.
I totally agree. I've had the same situation where you have to kind of understand where they're coming from and not take it personal, because sometimes that could become a barrier in itself where the service provider shuts down because they think the parent or the dad is just being rude, and it's not. It's just kind of part of their background. I had it even in other cultures where the parents are very demanding, and they've told me like, why didn't you answer the phone, and don't you work from 9 to 5? And I got to remember where they're coming from. That's just, or a language barrier. I've noticed too, when they have limited language, sometimes they have a short of words in how they ask things, so they ask very firm and very straightforward, and it's not because they're trying to be mean, but they have limited word choices or word options, so they make it very short and brief and to the point, and that could easily be taken as the person is being rude. But once again, it's always taking a step back, trying to see where the individual's coming from, and being humble enough to understand that you don't know everything and that you need to learn from that individual.
Joshua, would you like to add anything?
I think for me, what I've experienced is we have a lot of Central American communities and also from the Caribbean. So when you say ahorita, for some cultures, it means now. And for me, it means later. So we will always, it's those dialects and understanding those nuances and learning. It's for us every day, it's learning and meeting our parents where they are. But it's also, I agree with Laura and Maria. It's not that there are some of our parents are loud. It's not that they're being rude. It's just who they are and understanding your communities. And what we try to do is we have to be patient, because sometimes people are not being rude. It's just who they are. And they're just being a matter of fact and just being respectful and gaining that knowledge is key.
And if I could just add something else, is that I could think about the role that educators play within our families, right? Especially when you have little ones. and you have a child with a disability, and then you get this 3 pages that it says your child has autism, and the parents is like, and now what do I do with this, right? And I know the parents, the first point of contact that they're gonna go to is the teacher, right? And sometimes teachers, they might think like, well, it's not my job about educating the family about the disability, but it's your job to connect the family with other resources. And also to understand that if you are a teacher, a professional working with the families, if they do not come to you with the questions, it's because sometimes from our culture, we are not expected to be asking questions to teachers, doctors, people of faith, people of power, lawyers. You believe that they have your child's best interest at heart and that you trust in them. So parents take a step back, not because they don't mind, not because they don't care. It was embedded within our culture. And look what I said, it was embedded. We're trying to make those changes to make sure that people feel empowered enough to take a more active role, right? So I'll always start with the families like let's work together, let's role play. How would you present this question or this concern with a teacher, with a doctor? Because we see this a lot within the healthcare systems, right? People do not ask questions. They might not feel comfortable asking for a second opinion. And so we need to empower the families to feel really comfortable and say like, oh yeah, I could voice this. And then when you ask them, and how do you feel after that? They go like, oh, it felt good. I'm like, good. Then we're making progress.
Great. Thank you so much. So the next question I would like to ask is, how can local communities or faith-based groups better support Latino individuals with disabilities?
I can say, like I said before, making sure that whatever event they're hosting, that it's friendly, that it's open, that people feel comfortable coming, that it's accessible in the sense that it's being offered at a time when the families can come. If there's a way to network or use the word of mouth, that is huge because, like I said, they will go with those that they trust and that they follow. So even if it takes a while, maybe for a while you're only going to get 2 or 3 parents, but eventually those 2 3 parents become consistent and they will start spreading the word to everybody else and the rest will follow. So just kind of being patient and making sure that you're being accessible, that you are offering staff that can speak their language, that are friendly. One thing that I wanted to mention when Maria was talking about parents and how they don't ask questions, I always want to have or find a personal connection with my families because that helps them feel at ease and see that I am like one of them and I'm not just this professional that's just very strict and we're only going to talk about what we're, business like. You obviously have to maintain personal boundaries, but in our culture, that personal connection can get you a long way. So finding out that I tell them I have several family members with people with disabilities, that might make them feel comfortable and open up to work with me. Or I might say, I'm a parent like you're a parent and I'm struggling in a similar situation. So finding a way to connect with them will definitely open up the gate to build that trust, which then kind of goes a long way with them trusting you and asking for support. And once they trust you, they will go back and tell everybody that will hear them. And before you know it, you will get a lot of referrals or a lot of connections from people in the community.
I would just like to add that institutions of faith-based organizations and nonprofit organizations, that could be one of the strongest resources that we have within the community, okay? But also we need to be careful that if we are utilizing the walls of the institution, let's not have a hidden agenda. Because I had parents where they say like, well, my kids were going there because they had an after-school program for helping kids, but then during the first 45 minutes, it's all about helping the kids, but then the rest 30 minutes after is about, religious beliefs. Not everybody is going there for that purpose. So as an institution, right, as an organization, we need to be mindful if our goal is to have a place for families to feel included, to come and be educated, but let's not have that hidden agenda so that we could just, under the rug, start putting right there for our own benefits. That's something that I have seen sometimes, but once you address it and once you explain why is it different, and why does it need to be different, then people are more willing to make those changes, because once again, what we want is families to feel welcome, included, right? And now that they don't come to benefit from these resources and these opportunities for their children.
For us in our community, we can't unfortunately promote anything faith-based. So what we do is we have within our own community, our staff, 90% of them are Hispanic, and we represent, I want to say, every country in South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. So sometimes when we have those new families that come for a tour, we try to partner them with one of our staff members who is from their country or is from someone who feels familiar, who can support them. It's always finding that one person that can be a support system for them. Sometimes the faith-based, we are in state of Florida, so we can't promote that in the school system. However, we can find them resources. And it's like Maria said, finding that person and finding that connection to help support them.
Great, thank you. And for our last question that will close us out, something more tangible. Where is the best place to share resources with the Hispanic community nationwide? What do you guys have any recommendations that where people should go to or something to find? So, yeah.
I think that the answer is going to be very unique to each one of us, right? I mean, depending on where we are and the natural resources that like Laura have in Arizona, Josh in Florida, here in Alabama, depending about what they're looking. So, but connecting the family with the organizations that we have, right? I mean, I work for the Regional Autism Network. So when families call us and if they are calling me because they lost their job and they don't have money to pay for their electrical bill, then I have to think about what nonprofit organizations locally, right, are available, what churches they might have some funding to help them. So this is going to be very different. I don't think that there's a centralized location. However, there are certain places where I might refer a family that, because I know that they have more opportunities to have bilingual programs in terms of education. The Mind Institute in California, right? I know that in Chicago there are also many more opportunities than in Florida. So again, it's going to be very different depending on where you are.
I want to say that for us in Central Florida, and I know they are nationwide, we have what's called the Center for Autism and Research Development. So we start all of our families there because they are a network nationwide where they can find any resources and locally, but sometimes some of those resources, whether medically or they need certain resources that we don't provide in Florida, they're able to network out. And it's just, I would recommend, usually not all the time, but there's usually within the universities, within your community, there's probably a resource that you can touch into and pull from, because all the universities in every state, there's probably a typical resource that you can find that can help you find whatever you're looking for.
I would agree with you both. It's hard because we're all in different areas and serving different populations, but typically you can go ahead and hopefully if I have a good network of different connections, different committees, local mental health boards, through the school system, and I try to just navigate the system and help the family connect with what they need. Sometimes they even ask me, like, if I was to move to another state, what would that look like? So I might just do a little research and let them know what states they might want to go depending on their on how they serve people with intellectual disabilities. So it's not easy that we have a national system, but with the technology and the internet these days, you can pretty much have access to a lot of information. Just being open to kind of sitting down, finding 5 minutes to kind of navigate and try to find a resource for the family and whatever it is that they need.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for the great answers and discussion. I really appreciate you guys joining us for the Conference on Latinos with Disabilities. Is there any final words you guys would like to share before we close out our panel?
I just want to say that I appreciate that time. I appreciate that invitation. Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, Corey. It has been a pleasure, and I said, like, I humbly very honored to be having this space with Josh and Laura. Thank you for the opportunity. Please continue doing the work that you guys are doing. You know, I said that this is not a short run, right? This is a long, long run that we do. And I feel that sometimes we are doing that walk along with our families. And at the end of the day, it's all about that individual. And, you know, I just want to close with the thought that at the end of the day, when I go to bed, I want to say, did I do that? Did I do the right thing? Okay. Did I do the best job I could with the resources that I have? And how can I help so-and-so, helping them to help their loved one reach the full potential.
What I would like to share, I want to say thank you to the panel, to Carrie, to Alexis, to Laura and Maria. I think I've honored. The last message I want to leave is do not lose hope. Every voice counts. You matter. We all matter. And the more voices that are heard, the bigger the voice, the bigger the change. And always remember, your attitude will always equal your altitude.
I also want to say thank you. It's been a pleasure to be part of this panel, and hopefully we were able to share a little bit of our knowledge and experience of working with the Latino community. But like Maria said, we're here. If you truly are here to help others, regardless of what background they come from, you just got to be open to helping them to the best way that you can. One of my advice or my hope is, and I tell the young ones, including my kids that are in school trying to find a career, the best thing is when you're able to go to work every day and it doesn't feel like a job. I truly feel like my calling was to help others, to help families. And the fact that I get to do that every day and still get paid for it is amazing. So thank you, everybody. I hope we did a good job being, your panelists for today. And don't lose hope. And like Joshua said, our voice is only going to be heard if we make it heard. So we can't not say something, because the only way we're going to be heard is by speaking up and advocating for what people deserve. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, and happy Hispanic Heritage Month.
All right. Thank you to our panel for such a thought-provoking presentation. It was wonderful. Up next, we are going to welcome back Elisa Flores. You can find out more about Elisa on the conference site if you missed her session yesterday. Elisa brings a unique perspective as an accessibility specialist and community leader in the education space. Today, Elisa will speak to us about strategies for transition from K-12 to higher education with her presentation entitled Bridging the Gap, Tools and Strategies for Transitioning from K-12 to Higher Ed. Let's give a warm welcome back to Elisa Flores.
Thank you, Travis, for the introduction, and thank you to United Cerebral Palsy again for inviting me back for day 2 of this Latinos with Disabilities conference. As Travis mentioned, my name is Elisa Flores. My pronouns are she, ella, and I have spent my career not only in education, helping out students with disabilities in the K through 12 space as part of a transition team in exploring post-secondary options, but I've also had the privilege of working at various higher education institutions, including 2 universities and now a Hispanic serving a community college where I've had the wonderful experience of helping students and families make that transition from K through 12, and then also supporting them once they arrive to college or university. And so the title of my presentation is Bridging the Gap, Tools and Strategies for Transitioning from K through 12 to Higher Education. And the reason why I wanted to present this particular topic is because I noticed that there were so many Latino students that I've met with recently working at as a Hispanic serving institution and who I've worked with in the K through 12 system that needed the support and resources, whether that was understanding the laws in as they transition from K through 12 to higher education, or whether that was connection to resources, whether they were on campus or in their classrooms when they were in the K through 12 setting. So we'll go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the legal components, choosing the best fit for college and university, and then talking a little bit more about campus resources and considerations for the Latinx student. We can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So as I mentioned, in this session, I'll go through a couple of things to just ease this transition for us as we move from K through 12 to higher education. So first, I'll talk a little bit more about disability laws, the federal laws that guide the resources, services, and accommodations in K through 12, and then I'll talk about how that applies to higher education as well. Then I'll move into developing the right skills. So whether that is time management, organization, executive functioning, life skills, independent living skills. We'll talk a little bit more about that from what I've seen in the transition from K through 12 and as a current disability services professional. And then I'll transition into researching and selecting the best college or university for parents and students. I'll give a checklist that outlines some things to consider just as far as that transition goes. And then I'll talk a little bit more about exploring Disability Services Office and other campus resources, and then special considerations for Latinx students, both in the K through 12 setting and in higher education as well. And so really this goal of the presentation is to really empower, and I heard that word a lot in our panel discussion, really empower parents and students and to ease some of that anxiety that I know can come up with this transition. And we'll move on to our next slide. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about when it comes to the differences between K through 12 and higher education is talking a little bit more about disability laws. So in high school, the federal law that dictates the services, supports, and accommodations that students receive is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, in addition to Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Now, as we know in high school, these two federal laws provide students with special education services and support. Now, the difference we see here is once the student transitions from high school to college, the law changes from IDEA to the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504. Now, that's just a broad overview at understanding the differences as far as disability laws. But over the next couple of slides, I'll break that down so that we can get a better understanding of the differences between the two. Next slide. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is IDEA. Now, the Individuals with Disabilities Act is a federal law that was originally passed in 1975, but was first known as the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, Now, as I previously mentioned, this act was to ensure that children with disabilities had access to a free and appropriate public school education. Now, we know the law was renamed IDEA in 1990, but there's still been multiple times where we see more recent amendments taking place since 2004. Now, some of the key aspects of IDEA for parents to know about is, as I mentioned, this grants a free and appropriate public education in LRE, which is the least restrictive environment. It also gives parents rights, so parental rights such as written consent during the IEP meeting, and access to student records and participation in that IEP meeting as well. But it also helps to formalize and document the student's education plan in an IEP. Now, not only does it do that as well, but it also dictates that schools are responsible for detecting students with disabilities in early intervention and also providing special education services as well. Now, overall, with IDEA, it's important to note that there is a focus on success, and measures are put in place to make sure that the student progresses through their education in order to graduate and move towards post-secondary goals, whether that is transitioning to higher education or whether that's transitioning to employment after high school. Next slide. Now, talking a little bit about the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, as I mentioned, Section 504 of the Rehab Act applies to both students in the K through 12 setting and when students transition to higher education. Now, what this does, it prohibits disability discrimination at schools that receive any amount of federal funding. And it is then the school's responsibility to meet these requirements by removing barriers in the environment and barriers to learning as well for the student. Next slide. And now we go into the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, when we think about disability legislation, this is the piece of legislation that comes up the most. When we think about the Americans with Disabilities Act, it is a broad civil rights law that prohibits disability discrimination in schools, employment, and any private or public entity that offers goods or services to the public. Now, it's important to note that there are 5 titles under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and when we are considering the 2 titles that relate to higher education, it's important to know that Title II of the ADA covers any public higher education institution, and Title III would apply to any private institution. So it's also important to consider what that looks like as you're thinking about the college or university that you would want your student to attend or that the student is considering as well. Now, the ADA defines a person with a mental, is defined as a person with a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Now, that can include learning, thinking, bathing. So it really covers all of these major life activities and is very broad in that aspect. Now, there are 2 other things that is defined under the Americans with Disabilities Act as well. So it is also included is that a person who has a history or a record of such impairment or a person who is perceived by others as having impairment also would apply as an individual would apply under the Americans with Disabilities Act and would include that student in being identified as an individual with a disability. Now, it's important to note that while IDEA and Section 504 in K through 12 focuses on the success of the student ensuring that they will graduate and in providing all of the measures to ensure success. The Americans with Disabilities Act focus on equal access to programs and services in all areas of life. So when we think about that in a higher education perspective, it's important to know that when students transition from K through 12 to higher education, that we aren't making any modifications that might have existed in the K through 12 setting, but what we are doing is eliminating the barriers to participation of that student, whether that is participation in extracurriculars, or whether that is barriers to learning that we would then provide accommodations for. Now that I've given a broad overview of IDEA Section 504 and the Americans with Disabilities Act, I'll then compare all three so that we can get a better understanding of what this looks like in the transition for a student. Next slide. So first, let's compare. So as we know from a legal standpoint, IDEA provides free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. Now, as we move to Section 504, which applies to K through 12 and higher education, this then includes any institution that receives federal funding. And the purpose of it is to provide opportunities for that student to fully integrate into programs and services. And then as we moved on to college and employment under the ADA, it then expands the coverage of Section 504 into employment, private and public institutions, as I mentioned, transportation, and telecommunications. Now, IDEA covers students with disabilities that require special education services from 3 to 21 or until graduation. Now, as we covered, Section 504 protects students with disabilities from discrimination in an educational setting, and also the ADA protects students with disabilities from discrimination in the educational setting as well. Now, here when we talk about IDEA, we do know that it offers services that are remedial in addition to services for all mainstream settings. Now, in the higher education setting, ADA eliminates barriers that would prevent a student from full participation in programs and services afforded to all students at that university or college. Now, as I explained previously, schools receive that federal funding in order to provide remedial services in K through 12. But when we move to the ADA, it requires that schools do not discriminate based off a student's disability and provides accommodations. But it's important to know that schools, once students transition into higher education, schools do not receive additional financial support to provide services or auxiliary aids. Now, it could mean that when a student registers for services with the Disability Services Office on campus, that specific Disability Services Office will have a certain amount of funding in order to provide accommodations for that student. So it's important to consider that when the student gets registered with the Disability Services Office. But it's also important to know if a student needs updated documentation, for example, that they then will be responsible for either working with the school's system that they have in place in order for students to get evaluated, where I've worked at institutions that partner directly with other offices for students to get an evaluation or a re-evaluation done. Or it's important for students to know and parents to know on the forefront that they will need to work with outside resources in order to get updated documentation if that is required for a student to register with the Disability Services Office. Next slide. Oh, we might have to move back a little bit. There is one more section that I did want to cover as far as that table goes that we took a look at as well. So we'll go back a little bit just so I can explain that additionally. Great, thank you. So moving on, as I mentioned, a couple of other things that I wanted to mention in understanding this difference from K through 12 to college and employment is that school districts at the K through 12 level are responsible for identifying a student with a disability and evaluating a student with a disability as well. Now, evaluations are the school's responsibility and are performed at no expense to the student and parent. But it's important to know that parents must consent to evaluations and placement as well. Now, as we transition to college and employment, as I previously mentioned, this is where we see one of the biggest changes that exist from K through 12 to college, is that students must self-identify as having a disability and must provide documentation of disability to establish their need for accommodations, and that any evaluation and documentation done of disability is the student's responsibility and expense. Now, as I mentioned, just as far as the comparison between parent consent in the K through 12 setting, once the student turns 18, that student's information is protected under FERPA, and the student will then have to consent and be responsible for their own advocacy in that space. Now, a couple of differences from the documentation perspective. As we know, in the K through 12 setting, an individualized educational plan is a legal document that is developed with parents, teachers, and other specialists. Now, this could even include educational advocates as well. But as the student transitions to college, as opposed to having an IEP or a 504 plan, the college works with the student in order to develop accommodation plan. And that is created with the student identifying as an individual with a disability and in conjunction with the college's Disability Services Office as well. Now, when we talk about the environments that could be different from K through 12 to college, we know that placement must be in the least restrictive environment for the K through 12 setting, which could be a special classroom, a resource room, or general education classroom. But in college, as I previously mentioned, as the laws change, accommodations are provided to students who self-identify and qualify as a student with a disability to ensure equal access. Now, there are, at this point in the student's educational career, no modified classrooms, and students have equal access to participate in their classes and on campus with accommodations in place. So this is some of the comparison that happens from K through 12 to college, and an overview of also how Section 504 applies to K through 12 and higher education. Now, something that's important that I in particular do as a Latina woman working in this higher education space is when I'm talking to parents and students and having my first initial meeting in that Disability Services Office, Because information in trying to make that accessible to students and parents, what I will do is outline this chart, but I'll also make sure that this chart is not only accessible and in multiple language, but also in simple language that a parent and student can understand. Now, when I first started and transitioned from K through 12 to higher education, one of the biggest things that I saw in working in both of those spaces was that when I transitioned to working in disability services offices, that there were not a lot of representation. There was not a lot of representation in those spaces. So now getting the opportunity to work as a Hispanic serving institution and getting the opportunity to work with more Latina parents and students, I saw this gap in being able to access the laws and this information that existed to create something that was more digestible for parents and students that they might not have received before if they had, either attended a college or university that, let's say, didn't have a person of color working in the office or could talk or speak in a different language. So I would say, just as far as understanding some of the laws that exist when we talk about um, empowering students with disabilities and their families and meeting parents and students where they're at, I would say this is one of the biggest barriers that I see, that at least with that transition from K through 12 to higher education, we can do better to make sure that we are employing more individuals that speak multiple languages that can assist parents and students in understanding the legal changes that exist in a language that they understand and in a manner that they understand as well. Next slide. Now that we have talked about some of the differences as far as laws that dictate some of the accommodations and support from K through 12, I wanted to make sure that I also talked about some of the skill development that I see students either have a gap in developing by the time that they receive or decide to attend college or university, um, or things that I've seen once a student comes to a college or university, things that they are still actively working on or need more supports with. Next slide. So this section, as I mentioned, it's important for us to equip students with disabilities with the right skills that are needed for college when they're in high school. Now that I've gone through some of the laws, it's important for us to outline that part of those IEP or 504 plans should include some of the student goals and an outlined summary of performance. So that could include some test scores, for example, or any evaluations that happened in K through 12 as well, and some of the things that the student will work on. So this could also include some of their future career goals, and if they plan on attending a 2-year or 4-year institution as well. So all of that should be covered, right, as far as student goals covered in the IEP and then outlined in the summary of performance before the student graduates. Now, as I mentioned, there are a certain number of differences between high school and college. And so in this next section, I will go through some of the most essential skills that we can recommend for students to develop before attending college from a disability services perspective. Now, the first three that are on here, self-advocacy, self-awareness, and communication, are probably some of the biggest skills that I see students with disabilities either have a gap with as they transition to high school and college, or it could be something that we are actively working on with the student once they arrive in college, which in most cases can either put a student a little bit behind in receiving accommodations um, at the beginning of their college journey, or can deter student from us figuring out ways in which we can make sure that they're set up with the right services. So the reason why I bring up self-advocacy, self-awareness, and communication is because I really want students to start practicing these skills in higher in K through 12 settings. So this could be, understanding what a student's disability or disabilities are, recognizing some of their academic strengths, and then also certain academic areas that might be challenging for them. In this process, students should also be practicing how to articulate what their disability or disabilities are or is, how to ask for help, and how to communicate with instructors and the team. Now, I think this is really important because as we know, with the transition that happens from K through 12 to higher education, students are leaving the K through 12 space where maybe their parent was the main person in their IEP meeting, leading that IEP meeting, or maybe the parent might have had um, a little bit of hesitancy in sharing what the student's disability was with that student as well. That could have prevented them from being able to understand, what their disability or disabilities are. And so it's really important for students to get that practice in their IEP meetings by the time they graduate, to be able to empower them and for them to recognize their strengths, and to not, you know, push a narrative that just because a student has a disability, they can't be successful. And so we really want students to really understand who they are and some of the strengths that they have. And it could be strengths that are a part of their disability as well. And also recognizing that, where are areas that we might need a little bit more support as well. I know that for some students I've worked with, they might have told me that an area that's challenging is, executive functioning or time management, right? So, for example, we would want students to be able to know and work on that in high school, but also know how to ask for help. And I think that's so important because when we think about our Latino communities, that can be so difficult and challenging, especially as a first generation student at times, to be able to know who to turn to and ask for help from. So I think those are things that we can definitely work on and continue to develop starting in high school so that we can make sure that students have the skills that they need to be successful in college as well. And so some other things to consider around self-advocacy, self-awareness, and communication, also knowing their specific learning style and how they learn best. What accommodations that could have been the most helpful or beneficial for them. And then, as I mentioned, probably the most critical as far as self-advocacy goes is making sure that students are an active participant in the IEP meeting before they graduate high school. And it could even be them, doing a presentation on their disability and some of their strengths and accommodations that worked best for them in K through 12, just so that they know how to communicate those things when they meet with their disability services professional for the first time. Next slide. The next couple of skills relate to building confidence in student abilities and managing stress, right? It's important that students understand that their disability or disabilities is not a weakness. as this can perpetuate an ableist narrative that students with disabilities are different than their non-disabled peers. And so really we want students to focus on their strengths and achievements. If they've accomplished certain milestones during their educational career, we want them to be able to highlight those. So that they can build their confidence and strength and resilience. And so I think that's really important for students to start to work on in the K through 12 setting, so that they're able to bring in those skills and be able to adapt to the college environment as well. Now, as we know, one of the aspects of this new transition that could come from K through 12 to college is we're figuring out how to balance academic stress and also social life, right? We know that that is an important part of the college experience, and so it's important to discuss implementing healthy coping strategies. And it could be, figuring out if exercise is the most appropriate coping strategy for us, or do we do better with relaxation techniques, or do we need tutoring, or do we need to talk to a counselor or a therapist to talk through? I know that in the previous session we talked about mental health and how in the Latino community it could be a really tough conversation to talk about our mental health. And so figuring out ways on the forefront in how we can cope, right, with with our mental health, and the stress before we get to college can be something that could be very beneficial. I know that I have met with students that, tell me they may identify as being neurodivergent. And so one of the things that they worked on in the K through 12 setting is when they had anxiety about public speaking or anxiety about working with a group, maybe they're having a fidget, right? Maybe that they had a fidget to navigate those tough conversations. And we can take that and take that tool and coping strategy that the student might have had in the K through 12 setting, and we can work through how to apply that in higher education and when the student starts taking classes as well. I think overall, right, I think it's best for us to create a plan, right? Identifying who the student can talk to for support. If a student has a personal therapist, it's important to have conversations. Will that student continue with that personal therapist or psychiatrist if they're taking any medication? Or when they transition to a college or university, will they then, seek counseling services at that college and university as well? And I think all of these can be part of the conversation that we start to have with students at the forefront, so that they can build, again, that confidence and in their abilities and also confidence in being able to manage stress that can come with being a college student and managing, independence and courses and social life, everything that comes with being a college student for the first time. Next slide. And so I think one of the bigger ones that I've seen lately, just as far as my experience working with college students with disabilities, is the skills related to organization, executive functioning, and then note-taking support. I would say probably out of these three, the most prevalent that I've seen just as far as skills is working on that organization and executive functioning. So when we're thinking about developing some of these skills, right, it's important for us or for the student to practice how to create a plan to stay organized, right? Them maybe writing down and figuring out, okay, do I do better with physical planners or do I do better with digital planners? are there any time management apps that I've used in high school that were helpful for me? Or maybe there's some time management apps that were either, recommended in an evaluation or recommended for me to use in high school or try out before college. Um, Other things to consider is just, what is my plan for keeping track of assignments and deadlines? And what is a schedule that works best for me, right? And so, a lot of times, what I've seen students come in with in the college setting is that some students might have had, extended due dates, and that could have been an accommodation in high school that was a blanket statement, right, for all assignments that they had in their classes. And so when they transition to college, by the time they transition to college, it's important for them to know that extended due dates, right, is an accommodation that's typically not afforded for every single assignment. And the reason for that is because, some students can, push off or procrastinate an assignment, or it could be, a snowball effect that happens with students' assignments as well. And so it's important for students to really work through some of the like time management aspects. And that's why I said, either working with apps or working with planners or figuring out a schedule ahead of time, maybe writing down what our schedule might look like before we transition to college and figuring out time blocks in what will work. Um, Now with extended due dates, it is, as I mentioned, there are some case by case basis where there are situations where a student may get approved for that type of accommodation, but it's important for even students to know that it is typically approved for students with chronic or episodic disabilities that might have flare-ups. So as I mentioned, understanding that difference from high school to college and that now that we've transitioned, we're not going to get those blanket statements or a full extension for all assignments throughout the whole semester or quarter. But if there are certain cases where, maybe a student has a depressive episode, right, and it affects their ability to turn in work on time, or I've worked with students that might have been hospitalized, for example. Those types of situations are situations in which we'll work with the student and we'll work with the instructor to make sure that we are, getting an extension for those types of occurrences. But even for students that might have physical disabilities or chronic health conditions that may need an extension for work or flexibility with absences. So I would say, if it's time management that we need to work on is figuring out, right, a plan earlier on, but also understanding that, these are accommodations are approved on a case by case basis. And there are some situations where students have experiences, as I mentioned, with hospitalizations or a flare-up of their condition that would require them to meet with the Disability Services Office and then figure out a plan moving forward. So those are all things that I think are helpful just for students to start to practice in high school, but also to be aware of as they transition to college and having these conversations with their team and their parents before that transition as well. And then as it relates to note taking, right, also understanding, did we have guided notes in high school? Did we have a peer note taker, for example, or even figuring out, do I do better with handwritten notes or do I do better with writing on a tablet or a computer? Some students tell me they did better with having, an iPad, for example, or some sort of assistive technology that could have been provided in high school. So making sure that students are aware of that and recognizing how that can be beneficial for them. And also making sure that they're communicating that when they transition to high school or creating some sort of plan um, before that transition happens. And then lastly, as far as developing the right skills for college success, I did want to mention independence and life skills, right? And so by the end of high school, students should be able to manage their schedule independently without, external support for prompting. I think that also ties into the self-advocacy piece as well, and the student being able to figure out and advocate for their needs and advocate for the accommodations that they'll need, but also being able to understand, what a college schedule looks like and how am I going to be able to manage this without having, the team that I might have had in high school or without having my parents, right, either set an alarm for me to get to school or to help me figure out what assignments I have to do. Another important piece to developing, this independent and life skills piece is figuring out, okay, is the student demonstrating the ability to navigate their environment and can they recognize safety concerns, right? Who can students turn to in a case of an emergency is also a really big piece to that. Because you'll have a student that might be taking, different classes at different buildings on a particular campus. And so it's important for students to be aware of their surroundings. Sometimes my recommendation is if it's a student with a physical disability or a mobility disability, maybe touring that campus and figuring out, if they use a power chair, am I able to commute safely in the environment, or are there any barriers in the environment that would, prevent me from getting to class? Along with that, that can also include transportation, right? Does the university or college offer transportation that will help get me from point to point? That is also an important thing to recognize when it comes to navigating, that in their environment too, when that transition happens. Related to safety concerns, I think that is also a big one, right? Figuring out a safety plan, especially if the student let's say, is not attending a local school to them, being able for the student to create or making sure that students create a safety plan and who to contact in case of an emergency is going to be really important, especially if the student decides to go to a college or university that's out of state, or they're not planning to commute to and from their home in order to attend college and their classes as well. And then lastly, with independence and life skills, managing medications is a big one that I've seen, right? So we really want students to know, what medications that they're taking, what medications, if there are any side effects to medications as well, that would also be important for a student to know before they transition to college. And also understanding, when are we taking that medication? If it's an extended release type of medication, is that going to last me a whole day that I'm on campus taking classes, or do I have to take medications, break up medications at a certain point of the day that helps me be able to focus, for example, in my classes? And then, in particular, if they are commuting or living on campus, how are they going to store these medications, is also really important to recognize as well. And then lastly, as it relates to hygiene, right? So being able for the student to start to practice some of those basic hygiene skills without prompting in high school is going to be a really important skill for students to develop. Um, because once they transition to college, it's going to be on them, right? To continue on with those basic hygiene skills that they should have already started to learn in high school and practice as well. But the additional piece to this, just as far as basic hygiene skills go, if a student, for example, also, in high school was using an aide or plans on using a care attendant, to assist them with any activities of daily living. So that could be, getting dressed or, helping with carrying things. It could be books. It could be, a backpack to all of their classes. It could be just showering, for example, that a personal care attendant could be assisting with. Also knowing, what the plan is, right? If I'm coming to campus with a personal care attendant, who is that personal care attendant? And if I'm staying on campus, what are some of the policies in place for personal care attendants? And so figuring out those pieces before the student comes onto campus or figuring out a plan as it relates to that is also going to be really helpful and beneficial. And so next, I've already talked about some of the skills that could be helpful for students to practice in high school and to think about as they transition to college. But I just briefly wanted to go through a timeline for transition planning so that students and parents can start to create a plan once that student starts as a freshman in high school and what that'll look like, when they move through senior year and start that transition to college. Next slide. And so here is a transition planning example that students and parents can use and consider when they plan on transitioning from their freshman year to their senior year of high school. And one of the resources that I can share after this session is over is also this transition planning example in Spanish as well, so that Latino parents and students have this to use as a reference point too. But during freshman and sophomore year, so ninth and 10th grade, right? So this should be the start of when students should have started their transition plan. So typically by age 16, we want to start thinking about, what that transition plan is going to look like for a student. Are we thinking about post-secondary goals? Is that the student going directly to employment or a career, or is the student, going to attend higher education? So we want to start thinking about that and planning for that transition. And then in ninth and 10th grade, so our freshman and sophomore year as well, we want to start having the student participate in the IEP meetings as well. So as I mentioned, when we talk about building confidence and self-advocacy, it's important for students to recognize, what their disability is, what are some strengths that come as a result of that, and really be active in the process at understanding, what accommodations are working really well for me, what types of support are working well for me, and to really have a voice in those meetings as well. So, as we know, in the K through 12 setting, parents are oftentimes the one advocating for their children in those spaces, but it's also important for the student to have a voice and to be empowered to participate and take control of their own educational path and journey as well. So once we start considering the student participating in their IEP meeting, we then want to start collecting some important documentation, right? So we want to start collecting, that IEP. If the student has a 504 plan, instead of an IEP, we want to start collecting all of that information, even any evaluations that were completed and any relevant test scores that could help the student in figuring out a plan for accommodations and a plan for that transition for college too. And then during the freshman and sophomore year too, start planning for standardized testing. So whether the student is taking a SAT or the ACT, if you're already thinking about the student using accommodations for the SAT or ACT, It's going to be really important for, again, for us to collect that documentation and for us to start looking at some of the requirements to take some of those standardized tests with accommodations as well. And so as we move from freshman year to sophomore year, we're going to move on to junior year now. So now that we have covered what should happen in freshman and sophomore year, in junior year, we really want to make sure that we start getting any updated documentation that we'll need. It's important to know that some colleges and universities may require documentation that's within a 3 to 5 year period. And so it's really important for us to start thinking about, for students and parents, what does the documentation look like for a specific college or university? Um, what type of scores are they looking at? What types of disabilities and accommodations does that, particular office provide? So really making sure that we're being intentional at getting that updated documentation, especially if there are any specific documentation guidelines there. We want to make sure that we are reviewing that summary of performance. So what are things that the student is doing really well and where are opportunities for improvement or some of the academic challenges that we can work on right now to make sure that the student is ready for college and university as well. And then by junior year as well, we want to start researching, colleges, universities, exploring those disability services, websites, or scheduling a tour to visit the Disability Services Office to figure out, what are their documentation requirements, what are some of the accommodations that students have asked for in the past, or what accommodations do they provide. And then if there's any, other form of services that the Disability Services Office can provide as well. I know for some colleges and universities, if we're thinking about intellectual and developmental disabilities, there can also be specialized programs where they'll work on some life skills that could include a certificate related to that too. So we want to really start to do our research there and schedule those college visits and really get together our documentation for that as well. And then as we transition to senior year, we really want to start thinking about, creating that college list, completing applications, applying for financial aid, committing to a college and university, and then really starting that process with registering and applying for with the Disability Services Office. And as we've collected that documentation over time, making sure that we are also submitting that documentation in our application before we meet with a Disability Services Office professional. And so now that we have talked about some of the laws, we've talked about some of the skills, and some of the transition planning that should happen, we want to start thinking about, as I mentioned, junior year is really the time that we want to start thinking about some of the colleges and universities that we might want to go to. So this is all about choosing the best college and university for you. And so this is a checklist to kind of help us really tailor in and figure out, what are the types of support I am looking for from a particular college or university. So the first thing that I would consider is think about the size of the institution. Does the student do better in a smaller environment, right? Do they do better in having a smaller class size? We want to think about. We also want to think about, is it better for the student to attend a 2-year college versus a 4-year university? And there are some pros and cons to that. As I mentioned, I've worked at universities and now I'm working at a Hispanic serving community college. And so figuring out, what's going to be the best fit for the student and what really aligns with what they would want to pursue as a career after they graduate college or university. That could also be a technical school as well. So, is the student looking to get into any of the, specific trades? That would also be a really good thing to consider in figuring out if it's the right fit to start out with. The next thing is visiting the university or college's website for information. And scheduling a tour to get a better understanding of the programs and majors. I think that one is probably the most important, I think, in selecting the best college or university for you. Again, if your student is a student with a physical or mobility disability, that would be a good time for you to tour the campus and figure out if that's the right environment, and figure out, transportation options as well. Also to get a better understanding of programs and majors, right? You want to get a better understanding of what are the different programs that are offered at the institution. But I also would consider who is the faculty. Who is the faculty that are teaching at the institution? If it's important, right, for a Latino student in particular, does that college or university have individuals that speak Spanish? If language is something, or if there is a certain language barrier and you want parents and students to have access to the information that's most accessible to them, or to formulate a good relationship with, a specific instructor or program that teaches, or a instructor or a certain program that has folks that can speak to students in their native language or speak to parents and share a little bit more information about their programs. Um, I would also consider that in visiting the Disability Services Office as well. So as I mentioned, one of the things that I see as a barrier, at least for students, Latino students in their transition, is that, there may or may not be an individual that speaks Spanish or, speaks another language in that particular Disability Services Office. So that might make it difficult for parents to and students to understand, what is that transition that happened? What is an accommodation plan? What does support and resources look like on campus? So it's really important for you to also consider that as well. And then just visiting the university or college admissions website to learn more about specific academic requirements. I think that ties into really a student or a family really looking at the college's website, or really scheduling the campus tour to get a better understanding of that. I've already talked about if it's a student with a physical or mobility disability, to also consider transportation options as well. Exploring funding options, right? Is this a student that's going to, self-pay for classes? If you're a student that, plans on using scholarships or state funding or financial aid, these are all things that you would want to consider in choosing the best college or university for you. As it relates to DACA or undocumented students, we would want to also consider that those students are typically ineligible for federal student aid programs like FAFSA. So we might want to look at resources like dream.us that has scholarships and grants for undocumented students to attend a particular college or university. And then as it relates to that as well, when we're considering campus resources, right? Are there, academic and social groups? Um, I know for me, being a first generation Latina student, it was important for me to attend a institution that had a Latino resource center, that had different workshops and cultural events, and staff members that also were able to speak Spanish and had the ability to speak to my parents as well about some of the programs and services that were offered at the institution. If you're a student, you might want to think about, particular groups that relate to your individual background. So I know at my institution, we have like a Latinos Unidos, for example, that puts together a lot of, great programming for Latina students as well. Or even things like undocu, mixed status families, or DACA student organizations on campus, if students are transitioning and looking for that type of support. Because I think for a lot of first gen Latino students that, figuring out who to turn to for support, help, and resources, and being able to access certain programs and services, that align with their interests and their identity and background can really help ease that transition, and ease some of that anxiety that parents and students, might face as well. Next slide. So I've talked a lot about campus resources already, so I'll just go through a couple because I've already alluded to some already. But the Disability Services Office is an important one for students to know. Disability Services offices, as I mentioned, help to eliminate barriers to education, programs, and services at the institution. Um, as part of the student self-advocacy, they must, self-identify as a student with a disability. And then, as I've already talked about as well, each institution will set their own documentation guidelines. So it's really important for parents and students to be able to understand, what are some of the requirements as far as documentation goes, in order to apply for and receive accommodations. And then students must go through an interactive process. They have to apply, submit documentation, and then meet with either, an access advocate, which would be a person like myself, or an access specialist to really talk through and establish, those accommodations for services. And then lastly, some of the things that the Disability Services Office could provide include executive functioning coaching, tutoring support, or other social groups. Now, as I've talked about, as it relates to housing and residential services, this is really going to be a resource if students, want to live off campus or planning to live off campus. It could be another way for students to form a sense of community within the residential halls. It can also be a place where students, if they are needing to bring a service animal or emotional support animal onto campus, the Disability Services Office will work with residential services to make sure that appropriate accommodations are provided for students as well. And then counseling and health services. So counseling as it relates to mental health services. So most campuses provide short-term counseling that's about 8 to 10 sessions. That's covered once a student registers for classes, but then students can also be referred out to community-based care as well. Any medication could also be handled by health services. So health services and counseling services can also work in conjunction with one another, as well to provide emergency care and outpatient services for sickness and injuries. And then there's also many events, counseling groups, skilled-based workshops, crisis support as needed, especially if there's any behavioral, any incident that would that would get referred to a behavioral care team or a rapid response team where we would work all together to make sure that that student is supported with the Dean of Students office. And then academic advising and tutoring support. So this is another one, that families and students should be aware of. Getting familiar with academic advising office and their academic advisor, who will help them be able to select their classes and stay on track with their program requirements. And then the tutoring or academic support centers can offer one-on-one tutoring for specific subjects, group tutoring, peer-to-peer, studying strategies, writing support. Again, if you're looking at attending a Hispanic serving institution, there might be some embedded programs and services that may reach out to students or have some sort of support that is provided in both Spanish and English, just as far as workshops and connecting them with academic support. And then financial aid, I did talk about this already, but this is where students can get information about scholarships and grants. This can also be a place, you know, if students are struggling with FAFSA, they can also come to this office for support in paying for college as well. And then multiculturals and student engagement. So multicultural centers can be great places on campus where students can celebrate their identities and find a sense of connection and belonging. They'll often host events, workshops, have student development opportunities for students. And then there's plenty of opportunities for students to join organizations and clubs. Now, some considerations for the Latinx students with disabilities. So, according to a report done by the Office of Special Education Programs, about 27% of Latinx students between the ages of 16 to 21 identified as having a disability. Now, from that total percentage, the top 3 categories included specific learning disabilities, followed by speech and language impairments, and other health impairments. Now, it's important to note that some of the most significant challenges that students face include language barriers that could, impact family and students' understanding of policies and their legal rights, systemic bias and discrimination when it comes to disciplinary actions and diagnoses, lack of tailored support, and then limited resources that may affect a family's ability to advocate for their child. And I know that when we had the panel previously, this was an area where it's really important for us to really work on and make sure that we are providing the right resources and support so that families know their rights and know what support is available for them and their student. Now, to improve the special education process for students with disabilities, again, as I've talked about, right, providing bilingual resources about the special education process and making students students and families informed of their rights and the information that's included in the IEP. It could be very overwhelming for a parent and a student to really take a look at that IEP and to read through it in legal terms that may not make sense to them. So really making sure that we are providing those resources in their student or family's native language and making sure that's digestible information as well. Making communication accessible, providing interpreters, and making sure that we are providing qualified interpreters in that process, providing valid assessments for English language learners, and then providing including culturally responsive practices and encouraging family involvement and participation. Lastly, some college considerations. So as I mentioned as a wrap up, some Latinx students might be the first in their families to attend college. We really want to make sure that students know about their campus resources earlier on in their college journey and what resources and what type of we really want to make sure that students know about their campus resources earlier on in their college journey to make sure that we are being proactive instead of reactive and making sure that that student doesn't get lost. Having campus staff that are trained in culturally responsive practices who are bilingual speakers can help with providing information to families and students and can ease the transition. Peer-to-peer mentorship programs can also help students get matched with another student from the same background and have been really beneficial, at least in my perspective, in working with the disability student leadership program, and also working in conjunction with Latinos Unidos to make sure that Latino students are supported on their college journey. And then reaching out to multicultural centers, student organizations, and clubs that can make students feel less isolated and have more of a sense of belonging and community. And so that was some of the tools and strategies for transitioning from K through 12 to higher education. I really want parents and students to really take this information as just like a guiding point to really help you and help your student really ease that transition from high school to college. And if there are any questions, that I could answer, anything that comes up to really help ease this process. I want to make sure that I am providing my contact information so that you can follow up with me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elisa, for that. I'm going to just, we're running short on time, so I'm going to just ask one question. Find it. Let's see. What are some common mistakes families make during this transition, and how can we avoid them?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think it definitely depends. I think it's important for us to meet families where they're at, and so I don't think that there are really any mistakes, right? I think that there could be either misinformation or not enough information that are given to parents and students about the transition. And again, in a way in which they can digest that information easily in a language that makes sense to them. So I think just as far as, yeah, I think there are no mistakes. I think there's only just learning and being proactive. I provided the transition plan that I'll make sure that individuals who attended this session will get, that hopefully serves as a guiding point of things to consider. I think really working through some of those essential skills and being proactive and advocating if you feel like that the student is not getting the accommodations that they deserve and should be afforded, and then making sure that we are building those skills to make sure that students are prepared is the first part. And then doing, your research and working directly with the Disability Services Office and other resources on campus, earlier on to make sure that they're getting that most holistic support that they need.
Great. Thank you so much for answering that question. Well, this comes to an end of the conference. So what an incredible 2 days it's been. I've certainly enjoyed hearing from everybody. In behalf of United Cerebral Palsy and our generous sponsors, Anchor, Source America, and Waymo, thank you for your commitment, insight, and passion. We hope you leave this conference inspired and empowered. Remember, the conversation doesn't stop here. It doesn't end here. Please stay connected and continue this important work in your communities. Please take a few moments to complete the conference evaluation. The link is in the chat. For follow-up questions, remember our contact information is in the chat and on the evaluation form. Thank you again for joining us at Exploring the Intersections of Culture, Disability, and Identity. Have a wonderful afternoon.